Hey guys, so just before this video gets started, I want to say sorry this video took so long to come out because my basement flooded for about a week and I couldn't work on the video at all. So if it didn't flood, then this video probably would have came out a week ago, but it didn't, so I'm sorry about that, and let's just get started with the video. If you thought Street Fighter is bad, you're right. But somehow in only the span of 4 years, Capcom made the most influential fighting game of all time. Let's talk about it. As you may know, there are tons of versions of Street Fighter 2, so let's get started right away with Street Fighter 2: The World Warrior. It was one of the earliest arcade games for Capcom CPS hardware and was designed by the duo of Akira Nishitani and Akiman, or also known as Akira Yasuda, who were previously responsible for Final Fight and Forgotten Worlds. Notably, even when Street Fighter 2 was released, Capcom had no idea what sort of phenomenon it was about to create. Street Fighter 2 released in arcades in 1991 and was one of the first one-on-one fighting games to give players a choice from a variety of playable characters, an option which created an unknown level of depth and replay value for an arcade game. Each player character had a fire style with roughly 30 or more moves, including previously non-existing grappling moves such as throws, as well as 2 or 3 special hidden attacks per characters. In the game's single-player mode, the player's chosen characters pitted against the 7 other main characters before confronting the final 4 opponents, who were CPU-controlled characters that were not selectable by the player. Like in the original, a second player could join in and compete against the other player in competitive matches, with the multiple available characters allowing for more varied matches. Street Fighter 2 has proved to be popular due to all these factors, eclipsing its predecessor in popularity, eventually turning Street Fighter into a multimedia franchise. Now let's talk about the intro. We see 2 men fighting, a white man and a black man, with the white man punching the black man. This caused some controversy at the time because the black man faints in 1 hit. Something funny to mention is that these 2 characters are actually Mike and Joe from Street Fighter 1. Now we can talk about the characters. Returning from Street Fighter are the main characters Ryu and Ken. There are 6 new characters for you to play, so let's start off with Edmund Honda. E. Honda is an honorable and friendly man who warmly welcomes people he sees as good. He is also ambitious in regard to displaying his strength of sumo to the world, and to that end he always gives his all during his training and fighting regimens. He also enjoys hot steaming baths between training sessions, his favorite spot being the Kapukan U. Despite his apparent lack of agility and portrayals in other media as clumsy or silly, Honda is a very powerful sumo grandmaster. He takes both his sumo art and his Ozeki title very seriously, considering it a sacred martial art just like any other. Honda often throws a handful of salt in front of him before he begins the fight, in reference to a real-life sumo ritual, often performed as a means of purification known as Shubatsu. The next character is famous for being one of the first playable women in a video game and is one of the most popular video game women of all time, Chun-Li. Chun-Li is a resourceful and dedicated officer of the law with a strong sense of justice that rivals that of her father, as she strongly believes in protecting the innocent and saving the lives of others. As an official of Interpol, she takes her work as a cop with pride. Outside of her duty as a cop, she has an elegant, sweet, and feminine personality. Chun-Li, however, is not without her flaws, as she is shown to get very competitive with criminals in the Street Fighter media, and does not take kindly to those who insult her pride as a cop. As pointed out by Nash and Guile, Chun-Li tends to let her emotions get the best of her while on duty. This has at least on one occasion almost caused her demise at the hands of Bison. The next fighter is a human, even though some say he's not, Blanka. Despite having the appearance of a wild man, Blanka is generally passive and docile, and is fond of family connections and friendships, as well as children. Yet when angered, Blanka attacks as though he's a wild animal let loose from a cage, ferociously attacking his opponents with predatorial rage. As the series goes on, Blanka, while retaining his usual manner of speech, starts to develop a bit more common sense, which ironically makes him a bit more cautious-minded, foil to the hot-headed Dan Hibiki. His dislike of the masked men, as he believes good people shouldn't hide their faces. This is also shown in his rival battle with El Fuerte, and also with his win quote against Vega. Next is the Red Cyclone, Zangief. Born and raised in the Soviet Union, Zangief is an incredibly patriotic character who has been motivated in some way to fight for his motherland in every single game he has ever been in. While his personality has varied from one media source to another, Zangief has mostly been portrayed as a very fearless and tactical fighter who is prone to quick temperaments and is always very competitive. He is immensely proud of his physique and constantly belittles his opponent's smaller muscular build and blaming their losses on their smaller physique. His win quotes often consist of critiques towards his specific opponents about their lack of power, or him telling his opponents to build more muscle. Despite his short temper, Zangief has shown himself to be rather gentle-natured with a good sense of humor at times. once entering a tournament partly to win the admiration of a group of schoolchildren. This next character definitely has the most famous theme of any character. Guile. Guile is a tough man, both physically and mentally, who takes pride in his family and is a loving husband and father to his family. A stoic man at heart, Guile's calm and emotionless exterior actually hides intense feelings, especially his fury after Charlie's death. Although loyal to the Air Force and the United States, Guile is extremely persistent. He always seeks to get to the bottom of the matter, especially concerning Shadaloo, Bison, and what happened with Charlie, which has led to problems with his fellow Street Fighters, despite them having high respect for him, and has caused pain to his family, which hurts him deeply. Finally, we have Dalsum. Dalsum is quite stoic, serious, self-disciplined, humble, and also very stern when needed. Being a pacifist, he will never hurt a person more than necessary, or kill an adversary, even the most evil ones such as Bison. His pacifist beliefs also allow him to be a greatly loving father and husband toward his family. As an extremely altruistic man, Dalsum fights mostly for the poor and oppressed, as he constantly tries his best to raise money for those poverty-stricken people. Dalsum is aware that if he uses his power to harm, he may become evil, and frequently questions his decisions to use his power for fighting. Furthermore, all forms of yoga are meant to aid a personal journey towards enlightenment and not to harm others. Therefore, Dalsum is constantly concerned about his fighting style overwhelming his own principles of non-violence. These 8 characters can be put into 3 different groups of fighters: motion-based, charged, and grappler. In Street Fighter II, there's 3 motion characters: Ryu, Ken, and Dalsum. There's 4 charged characters: Honda, Chun-Li, Blanca, and Guile, as well as 1 grappler, Zangief. In the arcade mode, everyone has their own story and reason for defeating the evil organization Shadaloo. You'll fight every character in the game, and then you'll fight those 4, which we'll explain in a second. As I said before, this game got ported so many times, too many times to count, but a big reason for Street Fighter II's success came from the Super Nintendo version and how it looks so similar to the arcade version, but for some reason the screen resolution is so small. It also got ported to the Game Boy, although it's technically based on a later version of Street Fighter II, but it's just called Street Fighter II, so it's really complicated. We can now move on to the next version of Street Fighter II, which is known as Street Fighter II Champion Edition. It was released in early 1992, and its main feature is that you can now play as the 4 members of Shadaloo, which we'll talk about right now. Before I talk about them, let's talk about their names. You may have heard of this one before. In Japan, these 3 characters are known as M. Bison, Balrog, and Vega. When Capcom USA got Street Fighter II, they were scared that they were going to get sued over the similar appearance and name of a real-world fighter, Mike Tyson. So Capcom USA changed the names around as in everywhere but Japan. They are now known as Balrog, Vega, and Bison. Do not confuse viewers from overseas. Capcom usually refers to these characters as Boxer, Claw, and Dictator. As I am an American, I'll be referring to them as Balrog, Vega, and Bison. First up is Balrog, or also known as Boxer. Balrog is a tall, heavy-built, and very muscular African-American boxer. He wears blue boxing trunks with white trim and a torn white shirt under a blue tank top. His short hairstyle is similar to Mike Tyson's haircut from the era of Street Fighter II's release. Despite being the once great prize boxer, Balrog intentionally cheated in his fights whenever he felt like it, and has even killed one of his opponents, though by accident. In Spain lies Vega. Vega is vain, overconfident, and highly convinced of his own abilities. He is also incredibly sadistic and takes great pleasure in seeing the ugly murdered and preferably mutilated. He often has a stone-cold demeanor and does not show a wide range of emotions. His narcissism and disdain for anything lacking elegance causes him to clash with fellow Shadaloo member Balrog due to his latter boorish nature. Vega's vanity is demonstrated in how he uses his mask. He wears the mask not to conceal his identity, but to protect his face from scarring or bruising during battle, so that he can more easily view himself as perfect looking. Vega often removes it after fights during win poses, and his face is at least partially, if not fully, exposed in some of his character select mugshots, as well as some of his individual endings. Finally is the big bad boss of the Street Fighter series, Bison, or also known as Dictator. Bison is a typical villain motivated by his own self-serving interests and lust for absolute power through world domination. He is a psychopathic dictator and terrorist who seeks to rule the world with an iron fist, while also being universally regarded as the greatest and most powerful martial artist of all time, and will readily destroy anything or anyone who dares to stand between him and his shady goals. Possessing a vast ego and a god complex, however, Bison is physically incapable of feeling empathy for others and even takes pleasure in watching people suffer at his hands. never feeling a shred of regret or remorse for the numerous atrocities that he has committed. The rest of the new additions in Champion Edition are just small changes, but this game did get ported to the Super Nintendo again, and also for the first time to Sega Genesis. The next game is probably the smallest update to Street Fighter 2, but the big change they made is probably one of the biggest changes ever made to Street Fighter. That would be Street Fighter 2 Turbo Hyper Fighting. This came out a little bit later in 1992, and the only major change is that the game is so much faster. There's also some new moves like Chun-Li's Kokoken and Dawson's Yoga Teleport, but that's about it. This game, of course, got ported to the Super Nintendo and Genesis, and one thing to mention is that the Super Nintendo version, there's a secret code that makes the game so incredibly fast that it's crazy. It's really, really fast. The next version is probably the biggest update so far, and maybe the biggest update ever. Super Street Fighter 2: The New Challengers. This intro is so cool, with Ryu standing in the darkness ready to fire a Hadouken, really showed off how big of an upgrade it is, and how good looking arcade games can look. This game added tons of new things such as new Dizzy animations, new colors for characters, new sprites, a scoring system, and more. But there's a huge flaw with this game. It's slow again. There's no reason they should have dropped the fast speed from Hyper Fighting, but they did this and made the version very unpopular and not very playable. But I like it. But there's a reason this game has a subtitle, The New Challengers. There are 4 brand new characters, 2 motion characters, 1 charge character, and a grappler. Let's start off with the most popular one for more reasons than one, Cammy. Cammy is a strong, forceful, and determined young woman with a firm sense of justice, who is extremely polite, friendly, respectful, and enthusiastic toward those who she knows and cares, including Chun-Li and Guile, even helping others she barely knows like Ryu. However, she can be very brutal and sometimes condescending to those who she dislikes, such as Bison or Vega. She refuses to go down without a fight, using her extreme training from both Delta Red and Shadaloo to her advantage in defeating her opponents. Enemies are usually aware of the threat Cammy presents, and few are foolish enough to underestimate her. Though she does not believe in doing any more harm than necessary to her opponents, she employs some rather deadly techniques when they are needed. She is relentless and harsh on herself when she makes mistakes. Cammy could be a girl that's torn between childhood and adulthood, struggling with the resultant stresses. The next character comes from Jamaica, DJ. DJ is generally a kind-spirited, cheerful, happy-go-lucky man who loves fighting, dancing, and composing rhythms. In most of his in-game poses, artworks, and pictures, he is sporting a huge smile and making a thumbs-up hand gesture. DJ is rarely seen without a smile, and he tends to always see the positive side of everything in life, being consistently happy and rarely getting upset, angry, or sad, even under the worst circumstances. However, despite his laid-back attitude, DJ does not tolerate belligerent troublemakers at his performance, literally kicking them out if necessary. Next up is the famous movie actor, Fei Long. Fei Long is very serious most of the time with a calm exterior, although he can be roused to anger. He is full of fighting spirit and takes great pride in his fighting style, Hitin Ryu, which he seeks to honor in all ways possible. Fei Long also enjoys a good match. Although he is a famous martial artist movie actor, he still takes his time to appear at underground fighting arenas to find a worthy opponent to spar with, as seen in the Street Fighter 2 animated movie. There are also times when Fei Long is shown to be a little cocky in many of his actions, and also when win quotes against certain characters. Finally, we have another big fighter, Thunderhawk, or also known as T-Hawk. T-Hawk is commonly brave, tough, selfless, noble-spirited, centered, and fearless, but equally grumpy, cold, brutish, unemotional, and apparently unsympathetic. His lack of emotion display mostly comes from the suffering and devastation inflicted by Bison towards his people in sacred homelands, such as hatred grew even more powerful in Street Fighter Alpha 3 when T-Hawk discovers that his childhood friend and lover Julia was turned into Julie, one of Shadowloo's top-ranking female assassins known as the Dolls under Bison's brainwash. Once again, this got ported to the Super Nintendo and Genesis, except there is an issue with these ports. Arcade games started to get too big to the point where they had to cut content to fit in a cartridge, but it includes everything you need and it has screen crunch again. Nice. The final version of Street Fighter 2, at least at the time, was Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. This game has some great changes, most notably the Super Combo. There's now a bar at the bottom corner. When it fills up, you can unleash your Super Combo. But they're not so good in this game. For the most part, everyone's Super Combo is either a powered up version of an already existing move, or a combination of multiple special moves. Combos were also a huge part of this game, and moves are easier to connect to KO your opponent faster. And finally, the game is faster again, and it can be even faster than in Hyper Fighting. This game added a big mechanic to Street Fighter games outside of battles, and influenced it to have this in other fighting games, that being secret codes for new characters. There is one of these characters, activated by highlighting Ryu for 3 seconds, then T-Hawk, then Guile, then Cammy, and back to Ryu, and then press all 3 punch buttons, as well as the start button, to play as Akuma. Akuma is a cold and extremely powerful warrior whose sole reason for his being is to hone his fighting skills by battling and destroying strong foes. He rarely displays any sign of emotion or humanity aside from the occasional burst of anger, and rarely smiles. He, however, will not engage in battle towards helpless people, and in some cases may even defend them, either as a righteous calling or an afterthought of conquering major adversaries. The only instance of humanity he's displayed after being drenched in the Satsui no Hado is with Kazumi Mishima from the Tekken series, whom he respects even in battle. He takes his training very seriously and deals brutally with those who dare interrupt him, as seen in the Street Fighter III Third Strike ending. Occasionally he likes to test himself against worthy rivals like Gen and Oro. In later games, Akuma often refers to himself as the Denizen of Hell and Evil Incarnate, and is seen as such by many. This may be a result of the Satsui no Hado, or also known as the surge of murderous intent, taking a toll on his mind. There are technically more secret code characters, that being the old characters. By putting in a specific code for each character aside from the new challengers, you can play as the version of a character from Hyper Fighting. That also means they don't have a super meter, but in some cases such as Sagat, they're even better than their Super Turbo version. As usual, this game got ported to the Super Nintendo and Genesis. Wait, it didn't? No, actually, it only got ported to the 3DO. It was actually a good port because it's more powerful than the Super Nintendo and Genesis, which is a very interesting thing to think about. This game also got ported to the Game Boy Advance in 2001, known as Super Street Fighter II Turbo Revival. It's actually a good port, especially for this portable console. Although the Game Boy Advance only has 4 buttons, but I honestly think it doesn't even matter. It's still a good port, and for someone back then wanting to get into Street Fighter, it's not bad at all. This is when Street Fighter II took a rest. The following year, other Street Fighter games hit the arcades, which meant Street Fighter II was done. Until 2003, when Capcom released Hyper Street Fighter II, released for the PS2 and original Xbox. This game's main feature is that you can choose any version of a Street Fighter II character, which is cool. It's the same game, but you can play it online, and it includes Street Fighter III Third Strike, which definitely helped with its success. Then, around 2006, very soon after the Xbox 360 and PS3 released, there were many rumors saying that Capcom was remaking Street Fighter II with online play. It sounds cool, and it did happen. 2 years later. So in 2008, Super Street Fighter II Turbo HD Remix was released. What a nice name. As I said before, this game came with online as well as multiple modes, including a remixed arcade mode, a tournament mode, and a spectate mode. The music, stages, and sprites were all remade, but I'm not a big fan of it. I downloaded a trial to get footage of the game, but all you could do was fight locally and play as Ryu and Ken, and it was fine. Finally, we have made it to the final version of the game, at least now. There were rumors again saying that Capcom was going to remake Street Fighter II again, and in January of 2017, Nintendo uploaded a video for a game called Ultra Street Fighter II The Final Challengers. This was set to release in May of the same year. This game adds 3 new and returning characters, Evil Ryu, Violent Ken, and Shin Akuma. Oh, well, that's okay. In this video, we'll only be covering Violent Ken because Evil Ryu and Shin Akuma make their Street Fighter debut in another game. Violent Ken did show up in a game, this being 2003's Capcom vs SNK Chaos, but that's an SNK made game, and we probably won't be covering that for a very long time, so we'll talk about him now. Violent Ken is obsessed with power. All his winning quotes seem to focus on this obsession. His personality is somewhat similar to certain other characters such as Evil Ryu and DiCaprio, shouting and yelling quite frequently when battling against his opponents, and this trait can be seen in Violent Ken's pre-battle dialogue in SBC Chaos. There really isn't much known about Violent Ken other than he just is basically Evil Ryu, but with Ken. Ultra Street Fighter II also added some new modes, Buddy Battle or Dramatic Battle, which originally is from the Street Fighter Alpha games, where you can fight in a 2v1 or 1v2 against the toughest characters in the game. There's also a brand new mode, Way of the Hado, a mode where you take control of the Ryu with a first-person perspective of him, and you use the hot and new Joy-Cons to shoot Hadokens, spin with Tatsumakis, and Shoryuken your opponents. There are 3 difficulties with a fight with Bison at the end of the hardest one. And this is cool, although I wish this was released separately. But it's at least cool because it's only $20, oh wait, it's $40. My biggest issue with this game is that it got the giant price of $40. This is just Street Fighter 2, and sure there's a lot of new modes, but for a fighting game that's 30 years old and only has 20 characters, I personally don't think it's worth it. For reference, Street Fighter the 30th Anniversary Collection is also $40, and it has 5 Street Fighter 2s plus 7 more Street Fighters. And that's it. We're done, and it's safe to say that Street Fighter 2 is one of, if not the most influential fighting game of all time, and its legacy should never be forgotten. I like Street Fighter 2, but I'd rather go back to other games such as Street Fighter 3. But next time, that's what we'll be covering, right? Oh no, not the
Street Fighter Alpha.